The midnight escape Claire was a 23-year-old college student juggling classes, assignments, and a part-time dog-sitting job. Over the years, she had taken care of dozens of dogs, ranging from tiny Chihuahuas to massive Great Danes. Dog-sitting wasn't always easy, but it was a reliable way to make extra money. Plus, Claire loved dogs, so it didn't really feel like work. When she got a call to watch a Labrador retriever named Max for 3 nights, she accepted without hesitation. Max's owners, the Thompsons, were friendly and welcoming. They greeted Claire at the door with big smiles as Max barked excitedly, wagging his tail and jumping around. "He's got a lot of energy," Mr. Thompson said, chuckling. "Well, warn you now, he loves chewing things, so keep your shoes out of reach." Mrs. Thompson added, "But he's a sweetheart. He'll settle down after some exercise." Claire nodded, taking mental notes. "No problem. I'll make sure he gets plenty of walks and playtime," she assured them. The Thompsons showed her around the house, pointing out Max's food, toys, and his favorite spot to nap by the window. "We'll be back Sunday evening," Mrs. Thompson said as they loaded their suitcases into the car. "Call us if you need anything." As their car disappeared down the street, Claire turned to Max. "Well, buddy, it's just you and me for the weekend." Max barked in agreement, his tail thumping against the floor. The first date was uneventful. Claire took Max for a long walk around the neighborhood, letting him sniff every tree and lamppost they passed. They played fetch in the backyard until Max flopped onto the grass, panting but happy. She fed him dinner, made sure his water bowl was full, and spent the evening watching TV while Max snoozed on the rug. Before going to bed, Claire double-checked that all the doors were locked and the house was secure. But around midnight, Claire was startled awake by a faint scratching sound. It seemed to be coming from the back door. Groggy and confused, she listened closely. Then she heard a low whining noise. "Max," she called out, sitting up. The scratching continued. Thinking Max needed to go outside, she got out of bed and headed toward the kitchen. When she reached the kitchen, she froze. The back door was wide open, and Max was nowhere to be seen. Panic rose in her chest. How had the door opened? She was certain she had locked it before bed. Grabbing a flashlight from the counter, Claire stepped outside into the chilly night. The backyard was eerily quiet. The moon cast a pale light over the lawn, and shadows danced among the trees. "Max," Claire called, her voice trembling. There was no response. She shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around herself, and stepped onto the grass. "Max, where are you?" The neighborhood was still, save for the occasional rustling of leaves. Claire walked to the end of the yard and peered down the street. The beam of her flashlight swept over empty sidewalks and quiet houses. She called Max's name again and again, her voice growing hoarse. Minutes turned into an hour as she searched, her worry deepening with every passing moment. Finally, near the edge of a wooded park a few blocks away, she spotted movement. A dog stood in the shadows, its outline illuminated by the moonlight. Relief flooded through her. "Max," she called, running toward him. But as she got closer, she realized something was off. This dog was thinner than Max, its ribs visible beneath its fur. Its eyes glinted in the dark, wild and intense. Claire slowed her pace, her heart pounding. "Max," she whispered. The dog growled, a low, menacing sound that sent chills down her spine. Before she could react, it lunged at her, teeth bared. Claire screamed and stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. She scrambled to her feet and ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't stop until she was back at the Thompsons' house, slamming the door shut behind her. Her hands shook as she locked the door. Turning around, she gasped. Max was sitting calmly in the living room, chewing on one of his toys. He looked up at her, tail wagging, as if nothing had happened. Claire stared at him, her mind racing. How had he gotten back inside? And what kind of dog had she just encountered? She spent the rest of the night wide awake, every creak of the house making her jump. When morning came, she called the Thompsons and explained what had happened. They were just as puzzled as she was. Max has never escaped before, Mrs. Thompson said. Are you sure the door was locked? Claire insisted it had been. Despite her unease, Claire stayed for the remaining 2 nights. She kept a close eye on Max, making sure he was always inside and the doors were securely locked. Nothing unusual happened again, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. When the Thompsons returned, Claire handed over Max's leash and gave a polite smile. Everything's fine, she said, not wanting to worry them further. But as she walked away, she made a promise to herself. She would never dog sit at that house again. To this day, Claire still wonders what really happened that night. How did Max disappear and reappear without a trace? And what was the strange dog she encountered in the woods? The questions remain unanswered, lingering in her mind like a shadow she can't escape. The creepy caller, Jake, had always been an animal lover. He wasn't the type who enjoyed big crowds or long conversations, but he could spend hours with dogs, talking to them like they were his best friends. That's why he decided to become a part-time dog walker. It wasn't just a job for him, it was a way to do something he loved. He enjoyed the peaceful walks through quiet neighborhoods and the company of happy, wagging tails. People, on the other hand, were a bit of a challenge for him. He wasn't rude or unfriendly, but he found it hard to connect with others. He felt more at ease with dogs. They were simple, loyal, and never judged him. One warm summer afternoon, Jake got a new client, a beautiful golden retriever named Daisy. Daisy's owners were a young couple who lived in a calm suburban neighborhood. They explained that Daisy was shy around strangers and needed someone gentle to walk her. Jake instantly clicked with Daisy, who timidly sniffed his hand before giving him a small wag of her tail. The couple handed him the leash, thanked him, and reminded him to bring her back within 30 minutes. It seemed like an easy, straightforward job. As Jake strolled down the tree-lined streets with Daisy trotting happily beside him, he felt relaxed. The neighborhood was quiet, with only the occasional sound of kids playing in the distance or birds chirping in the trees. Daisy's leash stayed loose in his hand as she sniffed every bush and tree along the way. Jake smiled. It was moments like these that reminded him why he loved his job. But as they rounded a corner, Jake noticed something odd. An old man was sitting on a bench near the sidewalk. The man's clothes were wrinkled, and his posture was slouched. But what caught Jake's attention was the way the man was staring at him. It wasn't a casual glance or a friendly nod. It was an intense, almost unsettling gaze that made Jake's skin crawl. He tried to brush it off. Maybe he's just curious, Jake thought to himself. He kept walking, pretending not to notice the man's stare, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Daisy, oblivious to the man, sniffed happily at the grass. Jake quickened his pace, hoping to leave the strange encounter behind. After a few more blocks, he glanced back over his shoulder. The bench was empty. The man was gone. On the way back to Daisy's house, Jake took the same route. As he approached the bench where the man had been sitting, he felt a pang of unease. The man was back. He was sitting in the exact same spot, his eyes locked on Jake again. This time, as Jake passed by, the man spoke. "You shouldn't be out here with that dog," the man said in a low, raspy voice. Jake stopped, startled by the comment. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and caution. The old man didn't answer directly. He shook his head slowly and muttered something under his breath that Jake couldn't make out. Then, without another word, the man stood up and walked away, disappearing down a side street. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The man's words and the way he had stared were unsettling, but Jake told himself it was just an odd encounter with an eccentric stranger. He took Daisy home, gave her owners a quick update, and went about the rest of his day. That night, Jake was relaxing at home when his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Normally, he wouldn't have answered, but something about the day had left him feeling jumpy. He picked up the phone. "Hello?" Jake said. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a distorted voice whispered on the other end, "Leave Daisy alone." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" he demanded, but the caller hung up. He stared at his phone, his pulse racing. It had to be a prank, he thought. Maybe one of his friends was trying to mess with him. But the voice didn't sound like anyone he knew. It was low and distorted, almost like it had been run through some kind of voice changer. He tried to shake it off and convince himself it was nothing. But the next day, the calls continued. Each time, it was the same distorted voice whispering vague but chilling threats. "You'll regret walking that dog," the voice said during one call. "Stay away from her." Jake started to feel like he was being watched. He found himself looking over his shoulder constantly, jumping at small noises, and feeling a growing sense of paranoia. He decided to tell Daisy's owners about the calls. When he arrived at their house, they invited him inside and listened intently as he explained everything. The young couple looked worried. They assured him they didn't know anyone who would do something like this and promised to take action. They installed security cameras around their property and contacted the police. The officers took a report but admitted it would be hard to trace the calls unless the person made a mistake. Despite the precautions, the calls didn't stop. Jake began to dread every walk with Daisy, feeling like someone was watching him from the shadows. He started taking different routes and avoided the bench where he had first seen the old man, but the eerie feeling stayed with him. He couldn't focus on anything else. His usual joy in walking dogs was replaced by constant anxiety. One evening, after a particularly tense walk, Jake's phone rang again. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of him. "Who are you? What do you want?" he shouted into the phone. The voice on the other end just laughed, a cold, mechanical laugh that made Jake's stomach turn. Then, the line went dead. Jake decided he couldn't take it anymore. He told Daisy's owners he needed to quit the job. They were understanding but clearly upset by the situation. They promised to keep looking into the calls and thanked Jake for everything he had done for Daisy. As much as he hated leaving Daisy behind, Jake knew he couldn't continue. The fear had become too much. Even after quitting, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time he walked through his neighborhood or answered his phone, he felt a knot of dread in his stomach. The experience had left a lasting mark on him, and he couldn't help but wonder who the creepy caller was and why they had targeted him. Though he tried to move on, the memory of those whispered threats stayed with him, a haunting reminder of how a simple dog walking job had turned into a chilling nightmare. The locked room. Sophia loved animals, especially dogs. That's why she decided to become a dog sitter. She had a great reputation for being reliable and caring, and many families trusted her with their pets. One day, a young couple contacted her to watch their two small Pomeranians, Bella and Luna, while they went away for the weekend. Sophia was happy to help and excited to meet the dogs. The couple's house was impressive. It was big, modern, and filled with sleek furniture and large windows that let in lots of light. When Sophia arrived, Bella and Luna greeted her with excited little barks and wagging tails. The couple gave Sophia a quick tour of the house, showing her where the dog food, toys, and supplies were. Everything seemed normal until they reached one door at the end of the hallway. "This door stays locked," the husband said. "It's just a storage room, so there's no need to go in there." Sophia nodded. not thinking much of it. She was there to take care of the dogs, not explore the house. After the couple left, Sophia settled in, fed Bella and Luna, and played with them in the spacious living room. The dogs were playful and sweet, and the evening passed without any problems. That night, as Sophia prepared to sleep in the guest room, she heard a faint noise. At first, she thought it was just the house creaking, as many houses do. But as she listened more closely, she realized the sound was coming from the locked door. It was soft, like scratching, and she thought maybe one of the dogs had gotten trapped inside. She quickly checked the living room and found both Bella and Luna sleeping peacefully on the couch. Confused, Sophia returned to the hallway and pressed her ear to the locked door. The scratching was faint but persistent. She also thought she heard a low whining sound, almost like a dog in distress. Her first instinct was to help, but the door wouldn't budge when she tried the handle. It was locked tightly, just as the couple had said. Sophia felt a shiver run down her spine. Maybe it was just her imagination, she thought. After all, the couple had assured her it was only a storage room. Trying to shake off the strange feeling, Sophia went back to bed. But the noises continued throughout the night. Sometimes they grew louder, making her heart race, but then they would fade again. She barely slept, her mind spinning with questions. What could be making those noises? Why had the couple been so firm about not opening the door? Was it really just a storage room? The next morning, Sophia woke up groggy and uneasy. She decided to text the couple to let them know about the noises. She didn't want to alarm them, so she kept the message casual. Hi, just wanted to let you know I've been hearing some strange noises coming from the locked room. Maybe it's the house settling. The couple replied quickly, brushing off her concerns. That's normal, they said. The house sometimes makes noises. Nothing to worry about. Sophia wasn't convinced, but she decided to trust their word. After all, it wasn't her house, and she didn't want to overstep. She focused on taking care of Bella and Luna, taking them for walks around the neighborhood and playing fetch in the backyard. The dogs were happy and energetic, which helped distract her from the strange events of the night before. But as evening approached, Sophia couldn't ignore the locked room. She found herself glancing at the door repeatedly, wondering what was behind it. The memory of the scratching sounds made her uneasy, and she decided to keep a closer eye on the hallway that night. Sure enough, as soon as the house grew quiet, the noises started again. This time, they were louder. The scratching was more frantic, and the whining sounded desperate. Sophia's stomach churned with anxiety. She checked on Bella and Luna, who were both sitting calmly on the couch. Whatever was making the noise, it wasn't them. Sophia considered calling the couple again, but she hesitated. They had already dismissed her concerns once, and she didn't want to seem paranoid. Instead, she grabbed a flashlight and went back to the locked door. She crouched down, shining the light underneath the small gap at the bottom. To her surprise, she thought she saw movement, like a shadow passing by. Her heart raced. "Hello," she called softly. There was no response, but the scratching stopped for a moment, only to start up again a few seconds later. Sophia felt a chill run through her. She wanted to help, but there was nothing she could do. The door was locked, and she didn't have the key. The rest of the night was a blur of restless pacing and worry. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When the noises finally stopped in the early hours of the morning, she felt both relief and dread. What if whatever was behind the door had finally given up? On her final day in the house, Sophia tried to focus on her job. She fed Bella and Luna, took them for one last walk, and packed up her belongings. But as she prepared to leave, she couldn't resist taking one last look at the locked door. To her horror, she noticed deep, fresh scratch marks on the outside of the door. They were long and jagged, as if something had been desperately trying to get out. Sophia's hands trembled as she backed away. She grabbed her things and quickly left the house, her mind racing with unanswered questions. What had been behind that door? Why had the couple dismissed her concerns so easily? And why had they never mentioned the scratch marks? After that weekend, Sophia made a new rule for herself. She would never accept a job in a house with locked rooms. No matter how nice the house or how sweet the dogs, she couldn't shake the memory of the strange noises and the eerie scratch marks. To this day, she still wonders about the locked room and what might have been hiding behind that door. The forest trail. Liam loved being outdoors. He found peace in the open air, surrounded by nature. For him, walking dogs wasn't just a job, it was a chance to explore the world around him. Every day, he looked forward to taking his furry clients to different parks, trails, and fields. Among his regular dogs was Zeus, a large German shepherd with a thick coat of black and tan fur. Zeus was strong, adventurous, and full of energy, the perfect companion for long hikes. One sunny afternoon, Liam decided to try a new trail he had heard about. It was tucked away in a quiet forest on the edge of town. The trail wasn't very popular, which Liam thought would make it even better for exploring. He liked the idea of avoiding crowded paths and letting Zeus roam freely without distractions. As they drove to the trailhead, Liam glanced at Zeus in the back seat. The dog's tail wagged enthusiastically, and his tongue hung out as he panted. "You're going to love this place, buddy," Liam said with a smile. The parking lot at the trail entrance was empty when they arrived. The forest ahead was dense, with tall trees stretching toward the sky and sunlight filtering through their leaves. It felt calm and secluded, exactly what Liam was looking for. He grabbed his backpack, which held water, snacks, and a first aid kit, and attached Zeus' leash to his harness. "Ready?" he asked. Zeus barked in response, pulling eagerly toward the trail. The first part of the walk was perfect. Zeus trotted ahead, sniffing every tree trunk and patch of grass. The air was fresh and cool, and the sound of birds singing filled the forest. Liam felt relaxed and happy. He made mental notes of the trail as they walked, the way the path curved, the small wooden bridge they crossed, and the moss-covered rocks scattered along the way. After about 20 minutes, they reached a fork in the trail. One path looked well-trodden, while the other was narrower and overgrown with weeds. Liam hesitated for a moment, then decided to take the less-traveled path. He liked the idea of discovering something new. "Let's go this way, Zeus," he said, leading the dog onto the narrower trail. As they walked deeper into the forest, the atmosphere began to change. The trees grew taller and closer together, blocking out more sunlight. The air felt cooler, almost damp. The cheerful chirping of birds was replaced by an eerie silence. Liam noticed that even Zeus had stopped wagging his tail and was walking more cautiously. He sniffed the air and glanced around, his ears twitching. Liam brushed off the strange feeling creeping over him. "It's just quieter here," he told himself. "Nothing to worry about." But the uneasiness lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every so often, he would glance over his shoulder, expecting to see someone or something, but the trail behind them was always empty. About half an hour into the hike, Zeus suddenly stopped in his tracks. His ears perked up, and he stared intently into the trees ahead. Liam followed his gaze, but saw nothing unusual. "What is it, boy?" he asked. Zeus didn't move. A low growl rumbled from his throat, and his body tensed. Liam's heart began to race. He trusted Zeus' instincts. If the dog sensed something, there was probably a reason. Trying to stay calm, Liam tugged lightly on Zeus' leash. "Come on, let's keep moving," he said. Zeus hesitated, but eventually followed. They hadn't gone far when Liam heard it, a loud snap, like a branch breaking underfoot. He froze, his pulse quickening. The sound had come from somewhere behind them. Slowly, he turned around, scanning the forest. Still, he saw nothing. It's probably just a deer or something, Liam thought, trying to reassure himself. But the noise didn't stop. He heard another snap, then the rustle of leaves. Whatever was making the sound was getting closer. Zeus began to growl again, his eyes fixed on the direction of the noise. Liam's grip on the leash tightened. "Let's go back," he said, his voice shaking slightly. He turned and started walking quickly, urging Zeus to keep up. The snapping and rustling continued, following them down the trail. Liam's heart pounded in his chest. He resisted the urge to break into a run, knowing it might provoke whatever was behind them. "Stay calm," he told himself. "Just get to the car." The forest seemed to close in around them as they hurried back. Every sound felt amplified. The crunch of leaves under their feet, the pounding of Liam's heart, and the steady snapping of branches behind them. It felt like a chase. Liam's mind raced with possibilities. Could it be an animal, a person, something else entirely? Finally, the edge of the forest came into view. The sight of the open parking lot brought a wave of relief. Liam broke into a jog, pulling Zeus along with him. When they reached the car, he fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. He opened the door, and Zeus jumped in without hesitation. Liam quickly climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors. He sat there for a moment, trying to catch his breath. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he stared at the forest, half expecting to see something emerge from the trees. But nothing came. The trail remained silent and still, as if nothing had happened. Finally, Liam started the car and drove away. When he got home, he noticed something strange. As he unloaded his backpack, he spotted marks on the trunk of his car. They looked like scratches, long, thin, and deep, as if made by claws. A chill ran down Liam's spine. He hadn't noticed the marks when he parked at the trailhead. Could they have happened while they were in the forest? The thought made his stomach turn. Liam decided not to take any more chances. He stopped visiting that trail and warned other dog walkers to avoid it as well. The experience stayed with him, a lingering mystery that he couldn't explain. He often wondered what had been following them that day and why it had left those marks on his car. But no matter how much he thought about it, he never found an answer. From then on, Liam stuck to familiar trails, choosing safety over adventure. And though he continued to enjoy his walks with Zeus and other dogs, he couldn't help but glance over his shoulder now and then, just to be sure they weren't being watched. The vanishing dog. A longer tale, Emily had always loved animals, so when she was asked to dog sit for the Thompson family, she was excited. The Thompsons owned a tiny Yorkshire Terrier named Coca, and Emily had met the little dog before. Coca was a bundle of energy, always wagging his tail and hopping around like a tiny spring. Emily had heard that Yorkshire Terriers were feisty little dogs, but Coca was sweet and affectionate. He had a way of curling up on your lap and making you feel like the most important person in the world. The Thompson family's house was beautiful. It was a cozy two-story home with a red front door and a lush garden in the back. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, with soft couches, colorful rugs, and framed photos of the family and Coca on the walls. The kitchen smelled faintly of vanilla, and Emily instantly felt at home. The Thompsons had gone over everything she needed to know before they left for the weekend. They showed her where Coco's food and toys were, explained his feeding schedule, and reminded her to let him out in the backyard a few times a day. It seemed simple enough. "He's a good boy," Mrs. Thompson had said with a smile, scratching Coca behind the ears. "But he does love to explore, so keep an eye on him." Emily nodded, promising to take good care of Coca. She waved goodbye as the family drove away, leaving her in charge of their precious pup. The first day went smoothly. Emily and Coca quickly bonded. He followed her around the house, his tiny nails clicking on the hardwood floors. When she sat on the couch to read, he jumped up and curled into a ball on her lap, his warm little body making her feel cozy and content. They played fetch in the living room with his favorite squeaky toy, and Emily laughed every time he darted after it with more enthusiasm than his small size seemed capable of. That night, Emily settled into the guest bedroom. Coca slept on a soft dog bed beside her, snoring lightly. Emily found it comforting to have him there, a little companion to keep her company in the quiet house. She drifted off to sleep, feeling confident that the weekend would be uneventful. The next day started off just as peaceful. Emily woke up to Coca licking her hand, eager for breakfast. She fed him and led him out into the backyard, watching as he sniffed around the grass. The backyard was completely fenced in, with high wooden panels that seemed impenetrable. There were no gaps or holes that a tiny dog like Coca could squeeze through. Emily felt secure letting him roam while she stood by the door, keeping an eye on him. Later that evening, Emily decided to relax with a movie. Coca was on the couch beside her, curled up in his usual spot. It was getting late, so she decided to let him out one last time before bed. She opened the sliding glass door that led to the backyard and watched as Coca trotted outside. The yard was dimly lit by a motion-activated light, and Emily could see him sniffing around near the flower beds. She stood by the window, keeping an eye on him like she always did. Everything seemed normal. But then, she made a mistake. She turned away for just a moment to grab her phone from the kitchen counter. When she looked back, Coca was gone. Emily frowned and squinted into the yard, expecting to see him behind a bush or near the fence. But there was no sign of him. She stepped outside, the cool night air prickling her skin. "Coca," she called, her voice calm at first. "Come here, boy." But there was no response. The yard was eerily quiet. Emily's heart began to race as she walked around, checking every corner. She looked behind the bushes, under the patio furniture, and even near the fence, but Coca was nowhere to be found. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered to herself. The fence was tall and sturdy, with no gaps or weak spots. There was no way Coca could have escaped. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Panic set in as Emily searched the yard frantically. She called his name over and over, her voice growing more desperate. She even checked the gate, but it was securely latched. Tears welled up in her eyes as she thought about having to call the Thompsons and tell them that their beloved dog was missing. She couldn't understand what had happened. Coca was too small to jump the fence, and there was no way he could have dug his way out in such a short amount of time. Just as she was about to give up and make the dreaded phone call, she heard a faint noise. It was a soft yapping sound, almost like a muffled bark. Emily froze and listened carefully. The sound was coming from the direction of the garden shed at the far end of the yard. Her heart leapt with hope. She ran to the shed, her flashlight illuminating the way. The shed was old but well maintained, with a padlock on the door. Emily couldn't understand how Coca could have gotten inside. She had checked the shed earlier that day and knew it was locked. But the faint barking was definitely coming from inside. "Coca," she called, kneeling by the door. The barking grew louder, as if he were responding to her voice. Emily's hands shook as she fumbled with the lock. She managed to unlock it and push the door open. Inside, she found Coca sitting in the corner, trembling and covered in dirt. His eyes were wide with fear, and he let out a pitiful whine when he saw her. "Oh, Coca!" Emily cried, scooping him up into her arms. She held him close, feeling his tiny body shake against hers. "How did you get in here?" The shed was small and cluttered with gardening tools and old boxes. There were no windows and no other way in or out. Emily inspected the room carefully, but nothing seemed out of place. It didn't make any sense. The door had been locked, and she hadn't opened it since she arrived. She couldn't figure out how Coca had ended up inside. Shaken, Emily carried Coca back into the house. She wiped him clean with a towel and gave him some water. He seemed unharmed, but he was clearly shaken by the ordeal. Emily decided to keep him by her side for the rest of the weekend. She didn't want to take any chances. When the Thompsons returned on Sunday evening, Emily told them everything that had happened. She explained how Coca had disappeared and how she had found him in the locked shed. The Thompsons were baffled. They checked the shed themselves, but found nothing unusual. Mr. Thompson even inspected the fence in the yard, but there were no signs of an escape route. "That's so strange," Mrs. Thompson said, shaking her head. "He's never done anything like this before." Emily nodded, still feeling uneasy about the whole situation. She couldn't shake the feeling that something unnatural had been at play. Coca seemed happy to be back with his family, wagging his tail and acting like his usual self. But Emily couldn't forget the look in his eyes when she found him in the shed. It was a look of fear, as if he had seen something she couldn't understand. For weeks after the incident, Emily replayed the events in her mind, trying to make sense of them. She never did figure out how Coca had ended up in the shed, and the mystery haunted her. The Thompson family eventually moved to a new house, and Emily lost touch with them. But every now and then, she would think about that weekend and wonder if she had missed something, some clue that could have explained the vanishing dog. The memory of Coco's trembling body and the eerie silence of the backyard stayed with her, a reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved.